Hey, this last podcast in chapter 11 is pretty short, but it's kind of a really interesting one because it talks about how the solar cycle, meaning the cycle of sunspots, it follows a pattern as it turns out, actually affects the Earth. And so let's talk about the solar cycle here today. The picture that you can see here on the screen here, this picture kind of shows the solar, meaning the solar flares, or the sunspots. That's what I meant to say. The sunspots. The sunspots over a course of time. Here's 1980, here's 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, etc. And you can measure the number of sunspots each year. And if you look at this other graph, and I've got a better picture of it later on, you can see we've measured the sunspots for many, many years, since the 1600s. And we can see a pattern of the sunspots. If you kind of look here, it kind of goes up and down and up and down. And yeah, well, let's talk about that, okay? So here's the graph. So sunspots and prominences change yearly in a pattern called the solar cycle. The solar cycle. And you can see the pattern. This is starting in about, I would say probably 1950. Here's 1960, 70, 80. You can see it follows this up and down pattern. So you have lots of activity here this year, and then again this year, and then again this year. You can see this pattern right here. And we can see a particular pattern. In fact, it almost seems like it goes down, up, and down here. All right, and of course we're here, at least right now at recording, we're at 2009. So if we're at 2009, we're probably in a period of low solar activity. Okay, so over the last 140 years, sunspots peak in number about every 11 years. So every 11 years we see lots of sunspots. This actually affects the climate patterns on the Earth. So the climate patterns on the Earth follow the solar cycle. That's interesting. All right. Now, what causes this whole business? Okay. The sun has something called differential rotation. What in the world? Differential rotation? That's a weird word, Mr. Bergmann. Weird. Weird, that's what I said. Okay. I said weird, not weird. Okay. All right. Turns out that because it's a ball of gas, it's not a rock like the Earth is. I mean, Earth isn't exactly a rock. But the top near the North Pole, it rotates every, 35 days. Okay? So we rotate once a day, right? 24 hours. It does it 35 days. But guess what? Then we go 31 days, 28 days, 26 days, and the equator is like 25 days. So it rotates at different levels. And so this causes, it causes the solar cycle. And so, yeah, I think that's probably, this says enough. Now let's show a picture of the sun actually doing that on a quick little video clip. Cool. That was really cool, wasn't it? Okay. All right. Now the cycle, though, is not set at 11 years. It's not like it's a hard and fast 11 years. Okay. That's not the full day. It's somewhere between 6 and 16 years. So it's not a perfect deal. Now, considering the polarity, that means that the magnetism we talked about in the last podcast, of the sunspots, the cycle is 22 years because the sun's field reverses its cycle at the end of average 11 years. This means, you know how on the Earth we kind of have the North Pole and we have the South Pole, right? And compasses always kind of point to the north. Well, it turns out that the magnetic fields of things can switch. The Earth's magnetic field, in fact, has changed over the course of its history, but it hasn't recently changed. Not in our lifetime or anything like that, or even in the last 1,000 years or so. I forget the last time. That might have been 1,000,000 years ago that it last switched, or something like that. But the sun switches every 11 years. Okay, or actually every 22 years. So the cycle is actually kind of, even though it kind of goes up and down and up, each of these is kind of one cycle. So this is 22 years, and that's kind of how we figure that out. Okay. Now, the cool thing that's intriguing, or maybe most intriguing, is the connection between the solar cycle and the climate on the Earth. So if you go back to 1600, when we first started looking at sunspots, and we go to the year 2000, let's say, we can find in the Midwestern United States, if you happen to live in the Midwestern United States and you're watching this, and Canada, we experience about a 22-year drought cycle. 22 years. I wonder where you've heard that number before. Oh yeah, the solar cycle. And so that explains a whole bunch of things about the climate of the Earth. So if you have high sunspot activity, it's going to create one type of a climate, and then if you another. Now there was a between 1650 and 1700, so for about 50 years, they called this the Maunder minimum. Okay, and they called this the Little Ice Age. There were hardly any sunspots, and it made everything on the Earth Well, cold, particularly in Europe and North America. So, yeah. So if you get lots of sunspots, it makes it warmer on the Earth, and you get less, you get like a mini ice age. So it tends to be colder on the Earth when you are at lower sunspot activity. In fact, just this morning as I was running on my treadmill and I was watching the news, I do that frequently, there was an interesting concept. We are now in a low sunspot activity, and they said this is one of the coldest Octobers. I'm recording this in October of 2009. This is one of the coldest Octobers on record in the Colorado area, and you know, we have low sunspot activity. I'm not sure that that's a direct correlation, but that is one aspect of what's going on here. So eventually we're going to probably get a heat wave, and that's when we're going to get lots of sunspots, etc. So there's a correlation. It's not totally understood, and there's other factors, and some believe there's also global warming, and some think there's global cooling, whatever. There's lots of different things to explain the climate of the Earth, and so sunspots are not the only answer, but it is a factor in the climate of our Earth. Well, that concludes Chapter 11. So in Chapter 11, what we want to do is we want to continue just to talk about or to learn about the sun. In the next chapter, we're going to start learning about all stars, not just our sun, but all the stars. Okay, we will see you in class. Bye.